The Ctac were undefeated. No, worse than that. They were undefeatable. Every species, every so-called death world they encountered, fell before their war machine. Lava oceans, they brought marshmallows, flesh-melting rain, a mild inconvenience. Acidic tornadoes filled with razor-sharp insects that whispered your worst fears before dissolving your bones. Annoying, sure, but nothing they couldn't handle. The universe whispered their name with dread, and then they found Earth, a tiny blue planet orbiting a perfectly average star, so unremarkable at first glance that the Ctac High Command dismissed it outright. No perpetual firestorms, no arsenic-filled atmosphere, no immediate reason to care, until the reports came in. Reports so baffling that they caused 3 high-ranking Ctac generals to suffer simultaneous aneurysms. Now, Supreme Commander, Droth sits in silence, claws gripping the armrests of his command chair as he reads the latest intelligence briefing. His eyes twitch. His mandibles click in frustration. Finally, he exhales through clenched teeth. "Verax," he says, his voice dangerously low. "Explain this report to me." Slowly. Verax, a veteran scout who has seen things no Ctac should ever witness, gulps. He clears his throat. "Sir," he starts, choosing his words carefully, "the dominant species calls itself humans. They're bipedal, fragile, squishy. By all logic, they should not have survived on this planet." Droth narrows his eyes. "Then we invade and crush them. Next?" Verax hesitates. "It's not that simple." Droth's eye twitches. "Explain." Verax shifts uncomfortably. "Sir, they've achieved space travel, which isn't unusual. But how they did it, they strapped explosions to metal tubes and just yeeted themselves into the void. No careful genetic modifications, no calculated biological evolution, just fire and prayers. Silence. Someone coughs. Droth's mandibles grind together. "Primitive. Reckless. What's the problem?" Verax's voice drops. "They keep doing it, even when it fails, even when it should have killed them, and somehow they make it work." The war room stiffens. Conquering species was easy. Conquering creatures too stupid to know when to stop. A nightmare. Verax flips a page. They domesticated wolves, turned them into dogs, and now they let them sleep in their homes and lick their faces. Droth pales. They discovered a fish so poisonous it kills in minutes. Their response: they eat it as a delicacy. A general clutches his chest. They consume a liquid that literally destroys their livers. For fun. Another general slides. Under the table. Verax's voice is frantic now. They fight for sport. They run toward disasters just to see what's going on. If you tell them something is impossible, they take it as a personal challenge. Droth exhales through gritted teeth. "This is clearly exaggerated. You expect me to believe these creatures thrive in these conditions?" Verax swallows. His hands tremble. "Not just thrive, sir." He takes a breath. "They are bored." Every Ctac in the room flinches. There were rules to death worlds, a balance. Life evolved in response to the dangers of its environment. But this was something else. Verax hesitates. "There's one last thing. I hesitated to include this, sir." Droth gestures impatiently. "Out with it." Verax flips to the final page of his report. His voice is hollow. "They have a ritual." Droth leans forward. They stand opposite one another. Verax whispers. They clench their fists. And then they take turns slapping each other until one falls. A long pause. One general openly weeps. Droth stares at nothing, whispering to himself. Finally, Verax swallows hard. "Shall I prepare the invasion?" Droth blinks. His face is blank, but his claws dig into the armrest. "Verax," he says hoarsely. "Sir." Droth rises to his feet. His eyes are haunted. "We will observe." Verax gapes. "Sir, We've conquered every death world we've ever encountered. Surely, Droth turns to him, his voice barely above a whisper. Do you not see? Verax takes an unconscious step back. Droth exhales. They have conquered themselves. The Ctac Empire had never known fear, not once, not in all their long history of conquest. They were the apex of the galaxy, the undisputed masters of war. From the volcanic wastelands of Harkon Prime to the frozen tomb worlds of Zeril, they had crushed every civilization foolish enough to stand in their way. They had conquered Deathworlds, planets so hostile, so nightmarishly uninhabitable, that no intelligent species had ever claimed them, until the Ctac arrived. Their warriors marched through storms of acid rain without flinching. Their ships descended into gravity wells so intense they could crush lesser beings into dust. Their engineers built fortresses on tectonic plates that shifted like living things, adapting to terrain that refused to be tamed. They were the nightmare in the dark, the silent executioners of struggling empires. The universal truth whispered across the stars, if the Ctac want your world, it is already theirs. And then they found Earth. At first, they didn't even notice it. It was small, unassuming, a pale blue dot circling an ordinary yellow star in a quiet corner of the galaxy. A planet so mundane that the Ctac High Command dismissed it outright. No skies of burning methane, no oceans of sulfuric acid, no gravitational fields dense enough to liquefy bone, just blue and green and drifting white clouds, harmless, boring. Or at least, it should have been. Then the reports came in. Scout ships sent to analyze Earth's biosphere returned with conflicting data, as if the very planet was trying to lie about its own nature. Was it a death world? No. Did it behave like one? Yes. And that was just the beginning, because then the Ctac learned about humans, and nothing made sense anymore. The first reports were dismissed. A glitch in the system, they said, a misinterpretation of the data. Earth was not a death world. It had no searing radiation storms, no gravity that crushed steel, no atmosphere thick with toxins that melted bone. And yet, the creatures that lived there, humans, defied every law of survival the Ctac had ever encountered. Verax, a veteran scout with over 20 years of field experience, had been the first to report the anomalies. He had scouted the war-torn sands of Graxel, where the air burned like fire. He had mapped the black oceans of Zeril, where creatures the size of warships prowled beneath the waves. He had never encountered anything like Earth. At first, it seemed unremarkable. Just another planet orbiting a middle-aged star. Its surface, covered in water and vegetation, with simple weather patterns and a moderate climate. The dominant species, humans, were unimpressive at first glance, small, weak, squishy. By all logic, they should not have been able to thrive on this planet, and yet they had done more than thrive. They had conquered it. Verax sat in his quarters, aboard the Ctac observation vessel, staring at the blinking cursor on his report. How could he even begin to describe what he had seen? He took a deep breath and started typing. Report on species BU-4232. Designation: Humans. Summary: Do not engage. Do not provoke. Do not make eye contact. Biology: Squishy, fragile, seemingly unfit for survival. Actually, stupidly durable for no reason. Can survive broken bones, extreme temperatures, and willingly ingest substances that poison them. Have an organ called an appendix that serves no known function except to randomly explode. Can lose over 40% of their body and still function. Constantly dying, but refuse to stop moving. Verax sighed, rubbing his temples that barely scratched the surface. He continued. Psychology: Absolute nightmare. Exist in a permanent state of self-imposed stress. Willingly engage in activities they describe as soul-crushing for money. capable of instant, irrational loyalty based on arbitrary concepts like sports teams and which city has the best pizza. Somehow both deeply pessimistic and wildly overconfident. If told they cannot do something, they will immediately do it out of spite. He paused, his claws hovering over the console. Should he include the incident, no one would believe him. He exhaled. Notable behaviors. Laugh in the face of mortal peril. Literally, if threatened, will tell jokes. Use small, sharp objects called paperclips to fix advanced technology. Form intense emotional bonds with inanimate objects. See Wilson the volleyball incident. Use fire as both a weapon and a form of entertainment. Will deliberately scare themselves for fun. See horror movies and roller coasters. Verax shuddered at the memory of the human theme park he had observed. The humans paid money to be strapped into death machines that hurled them through the air at speeds that should have liquefied their fragile bodies. They screamed, and then they did it again. His claws hesitated over the console. Should he include the fall? He closed his eyes, still haunted by the sight. A human had fallen from an enormous height, certain death. Verax had braced for the impact, expecting to witness a tragic loss of life. But then, the human had simply bounced. Not only did they survive, they stood up, dusted themselves off, and laughed. And the others, the other humans, they cheered. They patted the fallen human on the back and said, "Damn, that was wild." Verax had nearly passed out. He took a deep breath and finished the report. Final recommendation: the Ctac Empire must avoid Earth at all costs. Do not invade, do not make contact, do not let them know we exist. He hit send and prayed that High Command would listen. 3 days later, Verax received a message. He read it once, then again, and again. He ran a diagnostic on his neural interface to ensure he hadn't suffered a stroke. The message did not change. The Ctac Empire does not back down from any challenge. We have conquered every death world. We will conquer this one. Dismiss your cowardice and prepare the first strike. Glory to the Empire. Verax stared at the screen. Then he muttered, "Oh, for the love of..." and slammed his head against the console. Fine, if the Empire wanted to throw itself into a meat grinder, who was he to stop them? He would follow orders. He would lead the attack, and when everything went horribly, horribly wrong, he would be the first to say, "I told you so," at their funerals. With the resignation of a man watching an asteroid hurtle toward his homeworld, Verax began preparations for the invasion. The plan was simple: deploy shock troopers in a key urban center, establish dominance, demand surrender. If humans resisted, obliterate their strongest warriors. Standard procedure. Unfortunately, there was an unforeseen issue. Humans did not come with a standard response to existential threats. Instead, they had multiple responses, none of which were even remotely predictable. For example, when the Ctac forces landed in a major human city, they expected resistance, military intervention, possibly even nuclear retaliation. What they did not expect was Greg. Greg was 27 years old. Greg had worked a double shift at his terrible job. Greg had just been dumped via text. Greg was in no mood for an alien invasion. So when the towering armored Ctac commander roared, "Submit, primitive, and prepare for conquest," Greg, without hesitation, launched his half-eaten burrito directly at the alien's face. Silence. The Ctac commander wiped beans and cheese from his helmet. "Did you just..." "Yeah, I did," Greg snapped. "What of it?" The alien hesitated. In every previous conquest, the natives had either cowered in fear or fought back with overwhelming force. Never before had a species responded with casual disrespect, and that was when everything unraveled. The troops hesitated, civilians gathered, someone started live streaming. A nearby food vendor, sensing opportunity, began selling invasion snack combos. Then, as if the universe itself had decided to abandon all logic, a squad of human warriors finally arrived. The Ctac braced for combat, but instead of elite soldiers, they were met with, oh no, it was police officers, with clipboards. Virax, watching from orbit, buried his face in his claws. The officers began issuing parking violations for the Ctac warships. The invasion force, trained for every imaginable form of warfare, found itself utterly helpless against bureaucracy. And then, to make matters worse, a human elder appeared. Her name was Doris. She was 83. She walked straight up to the Ctac commander, looked him in the eye and said, "You better not have scratched my Buick, young man." The Ctac commander, who had personally torn apart warlords with his bare claws, took an unconscious step back. The Ctac invasion was over before it even began, not because they were outgunned, not because they were outmatched, but because they were completely unprepared for humans. The invasion was meant to be swift and absolute. The Ctac had conquered countless worlds before, reducing entire civilizations to ash. They had prepared for every possible response, except this one. The moment Doris, the 83-year-old human elder, jabbed her finger into the Ctac commander's armored chest and demanded to know what they thought they were doing on her street, the troops faltered. The Ctac warlord, a seasoned warrior who had personally crushed rebel uprisings with his bare claws, hesitated. "We are here to conquer you," he stammered. Doris squinted. "Oh, no, I don't think so." The warlord's mandibles clicked uncertainly. "I beg your pardon?" Doris, completely unfazed, reached into her purse and pulled out a single peppermint candy. She shoved it into his massive clawed hand. "You look like you need it," she said sternly. The warlord stared at the tiny, wrapped candy in his palm. His mind refused to process the situation. Behind him, his troops fidgeted, awaiting his response, but he had none. This wasn't how conquests worked, and then, just as the universe decided things weren't ridiculous enough, the local homeowners association got involved. A small, frail-looking man in a polo shirt and khakis stepped forward, clutching a clipboard. His name was Richard. He adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat. "Excuse me, but these warships violate zoning regulations." The TAC commander blinked. "Oh, what? You can't just land warships here," Richard huffed, flipping through his paperwork. "This neighborhood has strict ordinances. Vehicles over 20 feet long are not permitted to park in residential zones without prior approval from the city." The Ctac troops looked to their leader in alarm. The warlord's mandibles twitched. "You mean to tell me our warships are illegally parked?" Richard nodded. "Yes, and there's also a noise complaint. Your landing sequence exceeded the decibel limit for this area. I'm afraid we're going to have to fine you." Verax, watching this unfold from orbit, screamed into his claws. Meanwhile, on the ground, the TAC invasion force found itself under attack, not by human soldiers, not by military-grade weapons, but by bureaucracy. Richard, backed by the full force of local government red tape, issued an immediate cease-and-desist order for the Ctac's invasion. The officers continued slapping parking tickets onto Ctac warships. A local news crew showed up and started interviewing civilians, asking for their thoughts on the so-called invasion. The Ctac warlord turned to his second-in-command, his claws trembling. What is happening?" His lieutenant's mandibles clicked in distress. "Sir, I think we've invaded the wrong species." Then the situation got worse. A nearby college campus got wind of the invasion. The students, sensing an opportunity, flooded the streets. One group held protest signs, demanding equal representation for Ctac refugees. Despite the fact that Ctac weren't refugees, another group started a GoFundMe campaign for oppressed alien communities. A local vegan group began petitioning for Ctac dietary rights, even though the Ctac primarily consumed raw, unprocessed protein cubes. One student ran up to the warlord, eyes wide with excitement. "Bro," he gasped, "is this like a real alien invasion?" "Yes." "Oh my God," the student shouted. "Guys, this is a once-in-a-lifetime event. We need to go viral." Verax, monitoring this from space, could only watch in horror as the humans began live-streaming the invasion to the entire planet. Thousands of people tuned in. The Ctac, an empire feared across the galaxy, became an internet sensation in under 10 minutes. Memes were made. Reaction videos flooded the human communication networks. One particularly devastating clip showed the Ctac commander frozen in confusion, holding the peppermint candy from Doris. The caption read, "When you invade the wrong planet." It reached 4 million views in less than an hour. The Ctac war effort was in shambles. The breaking point came when Greg returned, still furious, still holding a burrito. The Ctac warlord barely had time to register his presence before Greg, standing defiantly in front of an entirely unnecessary amount of news cameras, took a deep breath and shouted, "Y'all picked the wrong planet," and the crowd went wild. Chants erupted, "Shot, shot, shot, shot!" The humans, fully embracing the celebratory atmosphere, began drinking. Someone started selling invasion-themed t-shirts. A band showed up and started playing music, and before Verax could even begin to process the true insanity of this species, the police officers, the actual law enforcement officials, began breaking up the invasion party for violating noise ordinances. Verax pressed his claws against his temples, whispering, "I told them, I told them, I told them." The Ctac warlord, trapped between his broken pride and the weight of his tactical failure, finally caved. "Prepare the retreat," he muttered, his voice hollow. "Sir?" his lieutenant asked. The warlord exhaled. "We leave, now." And just like that, the Ctac left. They abandoned the invasion. They retreated not because they were defeated in battle, but because they simply could not comprehend the madness of this species. The Ctac Empire, undefeated across the stars, had finally met an enemy they could not conquer: humans. The Ctac Empire had suffered its first loss in recorded history. Not to superior firepower, not to advanced military tactics, not even to an act of sabotage. No, they lost to Greg, Doris, and parking tickets. The invasion of Earth, a campaign expected to last mere hours, had collapsed under the sheer, unpredictable insanity of the human species. The Ctac warlord, once a proud conqueror of Deathworlds, had fled with his tail between his legs, leaving behind nothing but confusion, internet memes, and a now viral documentary titled, "They Came to Conquer." But humanity was just built different. It had 10 million views in the first day, and that was just the beginning. Verax sat in silence aboard the Ctac command ship, staring blankly at his console. The retreat had been swift, but the damage was incalculable. The Ctac High Command was in full meltdown mode. "How do we spin this?" General Zio screeched, pacing wildly. "The Empire has never lost a war. Never!" Commander Droth, still visibly shaken from his encounter with Doris, muttered, "We could say it was a tactical retreat." Tactical? Zio's mandibles clicked furiously. "They filmed everything. It's already spreading across the galactic network. We are a joke, a meme." Verax, watching the chaos unfold, calmly took a sip of water. Then, very slowly, he set his cup down and said, "We surrender." Silence. Xio spun on him. "Have you suffered a cranial injury? We do not surrender." Verax shrugged. "We already lost. We just need to make it look like we won." Droth squinted. "Explain." Verax leaned forward. "Humans are unpredictable, yes?" Nods all around. "They don't follow the normal rules of war." More nods. "Then we use that to our advantage." He grinned. "We don't admit defeat. We generously offer them an alliance." Zio hesitated. "You mean We tricked them into thinking this was our plan all along. Verax smirked. Exactly, Droth blinked. That could work. Xio rubbed his temples. And if they refuse? Verax chuckled darkly. Oh, they won't. Because if there was one thing he had learned about humans, it was this. They loved being in charge of things. Hours later, humanity received an official transmission from the Ctac Empire. After careful consideration, the glorious Ctac Empire has decided to grant Earth the honor of joining our prestigious alliance. This is in no way a reflection of any military outcome, and definitely not because a woman named Doris terrifies us. Humanity's response, they threw a massive celebration, which was how Verax found himself back on Earth, attending an official alliance ceremony in the form of, oh no, a barbecue. Verax was beginning to suspect that humans measured success by how close they could bring themselves to death without actually dying. The barbecue, an event he had assumed was a harmless food preparation ritual, was proving to be something far more dangerous. For starters, the grill was an open flame, not contained, not controlled, just fire. Right there. As if these creatures had no concept of combustion-related fatalities. Doug, the self-proclaimed grill master, stood over it laughing, flipping massive slabs of meat while grease dripped directly into the flames, creating unpredictable bursts of fire. Verax turned to the human next to him. Should we be running? The human, Steve, shrugged. Nah, that's just a good sizzle, bro. Verax was fairly certain that was not a scientifically valid term. Then, to make matters worse, a nearby group of humans had begun engaging in a strange form of combat known as beer pong. Verax watched as they threw small white spheres into red cups filled with what he had been assured was poison. Why are they drinking that if it impairs brain function? He asked. Steve grinned. Because it impairs brain function. Verax had no response to this. Meanwhile, Doug was still aggressively tending to the grill. The flames grew higher. The meat sizzled ominously. A few humans cheered. One yelled, "Bigger flames mean better flavor." Verax took a slow step backward. Are we certain this isn't an offering to some kind of fire god? Doug wiped sweat from his brow. Almost ready. Then, with absolutely zero hesitation, he reached into the fire, bare-handed, flipped a steak, and laughed like a lunatic. Verax had seen warriors fall in battle. He had seen entire civilizations burn. But this was the most reckless thing he had ever witnessed. And then, as if the universe wanted to prove his point, a loud bang, a whoosh. The grill erupted into a fireball. Humans dove out of the way. Someone screamed, "Hell yeah!" Doug, having barely flinched, waved the flames away with a towel. "All right," he said. "Food's done." Verax could only stare. This was a death world. The humans were Deathworlders, and this was a normal day for them. Then, as his brain tried desperately to reboot, a small hand patted his arm. Verax turned. A human larva, a child, no older than 5, was holding something in her tiny, fragile hands. She grinned up at him. "You want to try a s'more?" Verax blinked. "A what?" The child lifted the object, a soft, gooey mass between 2 crackers. "It's chocolate, marshmallow, and graham crackers," she explained. "You melt the marshmallow over the fire, but you gotta be careful or it—" The marshmallow she had been roasting burst into flames. The child, utterly unfazed, stared at the flaming sugar. Then she shrugged, blew it out, and took a bite. Verax exhaled through his teeth. This species was unhinged, and the worst part, the s'more was delicious. That night, as Verax sat in quiet existential crisis, a notification pinged on his communicator. A message from TAC High Command. He read it. His stomach dropped. Urgent update. The Galactic Network has seen footage of your Alliance celebration. The younger generation is demanding integration with human culture. We are losing control. Also, what is karaoke, and why is it spreading? Verax closed his eyes. They hadn't conquered Earth. Earth had conquered them. And that, dear listener, is how the most feared empire in the galaxy lost. Not to weapons, not to strategy, but to Greg, Doris, barbecue, and bureaucracy. Now, I have a question for you. If you were in charge of an alien empire and you encountered humans, what would you do? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I want to hear your theories. Oh, and one last thing. If you enjoyed this, there's another story waiting for you. Click the next video and I promise it only gets crazier from here.